it's always a little shaky when people expect someone and somebody else shows up and you're that other person. And it's really shaky when that person was awarded a Presidential Medal of Freedom. So I'm going to do my best to honor his legacy, and my hope is that by sharing my heart with you, you'll be able to get the same wisdom, because I am here in the spirit of the same story. Is that okay with you? Okay, thank you. And on his behalf, I greet you to Miami Dade College. He truly was disappointed that he could not be here himself. And the message he asked for me to deliver to you is thank you. Thank you for the work that you do to change people's lives in your communities and on the planet. And he's just so thrilled to partner with you in order to make the world a better place. So I offer that message to you in a spirit of gratitude. And while I'm not a rock star college president, I'm kind of a rock star in my own mind. Like, who else? If nobody else will tell you, why not you, right? But I will tell you, Dr. Padron tells a beautiful story about coming to this country with his brother as a Cuban immigrant, and as a Pedro Pan, where he left his family and came here. And when he was ready to go to college, he applied to a lot of the schools you guys represent, and no one accepted him. The only place that took him in was Miami Dade College, so his story began here. And when you look at the trajectory of his life, he's never forgotten this community. And it's that spirit of leadership that grounds who we are as an institution. And that's why it was so important to us to host the exchange and why you're here today. Because it becomes about the tools. And it's very easy to forget the people that we serve and the planet that we're committed to and the context that frames the work. There is absolutely no way you can be at Miami Dade College and ignore the story of 165,000 students on 8 different campuses. And Dr. Padron's story is really a model for our student body. We serve a non-traditional student body. So what that means is sometimes people are older, sometimes their education gets interrupted, sometimes they work many jobs while coming to school. Transportation here is very complicated. You have people commuting for 2 or 3 hours. So as an institution, we don't have the luxury of ignoring the story that people bring into the classroom. In fact, by choosing to come here, they've made many sacrifices, and it would be dishonorable for us as an educational institution to ignore those sacrifices and not to provide them a quality education, because we still believe in the American dream. And it's a little shaky right now, I know. It's a little rough out there. But we are a place that has to fight for the dream. And being led by a Dr. Padron who embodies the dream, it makes people believe it's still possible. You know, I'm the daughter of Haitian immigrants. I'm a first-generation American. I didn't land on Plymouth Rock. I landed in Brooklyn, okay? And at the time I landed in Brooklyn, it was not the hipster, pay high rent kind of cool spot. It was do or die Bed-Stuy, okay? But it was also a place of broken dreams. You know, the rest of the world did not see the community I knew and the people I loved as people with a future. They were written off. They didn't matter. The picture they painted of us, because that's where I live, I didn't even recognize those people. I would not want to hang out with the picture they were painting. And so it's so important. I guess I should finish the story, right? Because it's a little rough to stop there. So my story is, my trajectory is, I'm a graduate of Duke University and the University of Michigan Law School. And starting from those beginnings, that's not the story that was written for my future. That's not what people thought I would do or be. And it is such an honor to work here as the Dean of the Honors College, where I get to create a space for other little kids like me, super nerds in underserved communities who see a bigger world and who want to play a role in that world. And I'm proud to share, because of Miami Dade, our kids transfer to some of the best schools in the country. Miami Dade College is the top institution earning Jack Kent Cooke scholarships worth up to $120,000. So you think about it. Someone with Dr. Padron's story who comes here with just his brother and a couple of coins in his pocket could end up at Yale with full tuition in a span of 2 years. That's the dream we believe in here. That's the story we tell, but it's a collective of stories. So given the direction our country is moving towards in so many ways, in terms of our government, in terms of the energy, the demographics, we think as an institution we have something to contribute to the Ashoka U network. We were the first school with offering 2-year degrees to join the network. Woohoo! But what that means is we're bringing a whole new angle to change making to the conversation. And what that also means is we need for you to see what you can learn from us, because we're bringing something different to the table. And we, in turn, have things to learn from you, because we're looking for a seamless integration. So everybody wins, right? So this is one of those spaces where we get to play together because we're all committed in the same direction. So what I'd like to do is just offer just 4 things. You know, with the Letterman days, there was a top 10. I got 4, okay? And the idea is it's our gift as Miami Dade College on behalf of the 165,000, because we roll deep. But it's on behalf of these people that we want you to think about what you do today and what you take home. But we also want to share the spirit that has welcomed you here that we hope will go with you. And none of it is stuff you don't know, but together it changes people's lives. So the first is we don't believe in walls. We don't do walls at Miami Dade College. No walls. And that starts with our admissions process. We are an open access institution. And think about the message that sends. That means everybody can be here. It doesn't matter where you are. So if you don't have a high school diploma, we got you. If your English isn't up to par, we got you. If you're a high achieving student, I got you. We have a menu of options for you. So you are taken care of once you step into this community. And that lays the foundation for everything else that happens here. The second thing is, as an institution, we see you as your possibility. So whatever happened to you before you got here, good or bad, it's up to you to decide how you want it to play out in your life. Hopefully, you will take advantage of our reflective opportunities to integrate and leverage the past so it gives you a good sense of direction for your future. But we recognize a lot of people are not necessarily wanting to carry that past, or at least all of it, into their future. So they need people who want to stand in their present to see the possibility of the future. They need to be affirmed. This is not a place where we're trying to weed people out. The culture is designed because we all believe everybody wins. You know, I used to be able to say, we're the Miami Heat of education when we had LeBron, but clearly we're not there yet, but we're getting there. We're getting there. I'm working on another analogy. But it's, I forgot this is being streamed. I love you, LeBron. But, you know, but the key, but I think part of it is also this understanding that we're playing a high-level game. And when you're playing with winners and you create an environment to win, everybody plays harder, right? So we don't look at people in a place of deficit. We're looking for abundance in any way, shape, or form. The third piece, and this is really critical, and it probably was a human-centered design before it was called human-centered design, is we're a teaching institution. We don't assume anything. And we make it safe for you to ask whatever you'd like in whatever way you'd like. And because we have such a shared understanding of where people want to go, we help one another. So here, competition is a community sport. We all want to win, and people help each other in all the ways possible and within their capacity. And it's actually a beautiful spirit, because if you think about a place without walls and a place that's all about possibility, you know, here Miami Dade College is called the Dream Factory and Democracy's College. I mean, we ride that wave. So of course, if you're playing on this team, that's the game you're playing. And it creates a safe place for your brain to soar and your heart to follow. And that's what I will close with. So our secret sauce, and I hate telling you this because then you'll take it, but our secret sauce is we do all of this with love. We live in connectivity. Yeah, give it up for love, right? But you know, I'm joking tongue in cheek, but you know, we know higher education isn't always the warmest and fuzziest place. to show your love. And if you've got passion, it's kind of hard to do that devoid of love. So if we think about these pieces being integrated and what's possible, just imagine for a moment what your classrooms would be like if competition was collaborative and community. If people really, really looked at you when they saw you. Because the thing about here is we touch. If you're hanging out in Miami Dade long enough, somebody's going to kiss you. And it's usually appropriate. Sometimes you don't know which way to go. It gets a little dicey. But we believe in seeing you for who you are. And that power of touch, when you're thinking about people who are going through things in their lives, and it's not everybody, but we all have our moments. If you're paying attention and you see people for who they are, you'll know when it's right to reach out and touch. And sometimes the touch doesn't have to be physical. But that notion of connectivity, especially when people feel vulnerable like people feel right now, it's the glue. It's the glue. And it applies from the students to the staff to our public safety officers, all the way up and across 8 campuses. So that's the entire county. And we've got over 2 million alumni, so we've got people. We graduate the most teachers that teach in our public school system, the public safety officers, government officials, the nurses, the entry-level positions that in our medical community, and we know that we do a lot of medical stuff here in Florida. So the reality is that love, it's out there. So our commitment to you is we're not giving up this game. We're fighting for democracy, and we're going to create those pathways for the communities that we serve. Our invitation, and the question I have to ask you, is can we count on you to do the same wherever you are? I didn't hear you. Thank you.
Okay. Great. And now I am delighted to welcome Mr. Parker Palmer to the stage.
Well, thank you. I'm just delighted to be here. And as a longtime fan of Miami Dade, way back from the 60s, and now a guest on your campus, there is something I need before I can get started. I would like one of those appropriate kisses.
You want red lipstick?
Thank you. Okay. Now I'm good to go. And if I have lipstick on my ear, you can explain it to my wife when I get back to Madison. I'm so grateful to so many people this morning, Miami Dade, certainly to Ashoka, to the Fetzer Institute, to my colleagues, Sherry Watt and Marcia Eames Shively, who've been doing a workshop here at this exchange, and to all of you. I'm 78 years old. I'm aware of that because my birthday was last week, and been thinking a lot about coming here in the spirit of handing a torch of educational change on to a new generation, which is a thrilling thing for me. This educational reform movement goes through waves. There was a wave back at the beginning of the 20th century with people like John Dewey and Alexander Meiklejohn. There was a wave in the 60s with Joseph Tussman and others. I spent the 60s at Berkeley. And I remember very clearly an older mentor of mine burned out, something I hope none of you ever become. I'm not burned out. I don't know why you should be. But this older mentor of mine burned out and cynical when he heard what I wanted to devote my life to in terms of educational reform. He said, you know, Parker, trying to change a university is like trying to change a graveyard. You don't get a lot of help from the inhabitants. So it's wonderful to be among the arisen. I mean, not the walking dead, but the fully alive. And here you are, and I find that very energizing. And then to follow in the wake of a rock star, good Lord, this is pig heaven for me. I wish I had that older mentor here today to show him a room full of people who are all about how wrong he was. So I want to do something that I may have to ask forgiveness for, but as an old community organizer, you do it first and then you ask forgiveness later. I want to take a quick philosophical look at the DNA of higher education, some very foundational elements that I don't think we talk about enough as we go about our important practical work of change. I want to talk about epistemology. That's a word that's illegal in 12 states. Florida may be one of them, I'm not sure, and it's a conversation stopper, but hang with me for a minute. The core business of higher education is knowing, teaching, and learning, and the formation or deformation of human lives depending on how we do our knowing, teaching, and learning. The philosophical terms for what I'm talking about are epistemology, ways of knowing, pedagogy, ways of teaching and learning, and ethics, the shape of the life of the student who is formed or deformed by how we do all of the above. Every epistemology, every way of knowing tends to become a pedagogy. And every pedagogy, every way of teaching and learning tends to become an ethic in the lives of people who are exposed to it or affected by it. The dominant epistemology in higher education is objectivism, the idea that we can't know anything truly and well without holding ourselves at distance from it. If you get too close, your subjectivity slops over, and that's not a good thing in the dominant model of how higher education is done. It's an epistemology of disengagement. I happen to think it's flat wrong. I think science is a contact sport. I think science is a very interactive communal activity. But in higher education, that's not the view that dominates. That epistemology leads to a pedagogy in which subjects, students, teachers, and the world are distanced from one another. So, an epistemology of distance becomes a pedagogy of distance or disengagement. And that, in turn, I think, leads to an ethic that puts people at a distance from life in the world. An ethic of disengagement, where people experience life, and let's mention politics here, more as a spectator sport than an engaged involvement with the important affairs of our time. Years ago, when I started in this work, I was reading a book by Connell and Feig called Hitler's Death Camps. And I want you to read a quote I want to read for you a quote that's never left my mind for the past 40 or 50 years. We in higher education have identified certain, quote, civilizing aspects of the modern world: music, art, a sense of family, love, appreciation of beauty, intellect, education. But after Auschwitz, we must realize that being a killer, a family man, and a lover of Beethoven are not contradictions. The killers did not belong to a gutter society of misfits, nor could they be dismissed as just a collection of rabble. They were scholars, artists, lawyers, theologians, aristocrats. Germanic higher education had perfected this distanced model. And all of this has been challenged in the last few decades by feminist scholarship, by Black and Chicano scholarship, other forms of scholarship coming from people of color. And higher education has managed to deflect or compartmentalize all of those fundamental challenges to the dominant epistemology, to the dominant pedagogy, to the dominant ethical deformation. I'm hoping there might emerge in your generation a new form of civic scholarship, where engagement with society becomes something that people are rewarded for rather than kept away from. That might begin to push things over the edge in combination with the gifts of insight and understanding that feminists and scholars of color have been trying to give to us. So what I want to talk about is I turn to the 5 habits of the heart, and I seem to have a receding podium here, which I'll have to. It's one of the things that happens when you get old. Everything goes south, you know. So don't worry about me. I'm not unaccustomed to this. You have 5 habits of the heart, either in your lap or you're sitting on them. I don't know which. And I want to ground what I have to say now in those 5 habits very concretely. But what I want to say is that those 5 habits of the heart, which I originally wrote about in a book called Healing the Heart of Democracy as civic virtues, are not civic virtues alone. They are also pedagogical virtues, that if we could embody them at the heart of what we're doing in higher education, we would no longer produce educated people who live at amoral distance from the vital affairs of our time. So let me start by inviting you to come with me in imagination into a political science classroom where a course on American democracy and its core values is underway. The professor is a good lecturer, and the topics explored are well chosen. Who were the founders and what animated them? What was the nature of their blindness? What was the nature of their brilliance? What happened at the Constitutional Convention of 1787, where over 30% of the delegates walked out saying, "A pox on all your houses," thus proving that conflict is nothing new in this country? How shall we understand the nature of the governing institutions the founders gave us, invented in part because they could not reach consensus on basics? How shall we understand the source of the racist, sexist, genocidal DNA that was woven into this nation's makeup? And how shall we understand the vital role of citizen power in the social movements that have kept us seeking the more perfect union that the founders knew we would need? How shall we assess our successes and failures as a nation, the advances and setbacks we keep cycling through as we pursue the ever-elusive American dream? And what can we do to keep up the odds that every generation is able to find the stamina to keep doing the work of vigilant citizenship over and over and over again, knowing that it's never finished? Does that sound like a good course for the formation of citizens? Well, the topics are right. Some of them, these are some of the right topics, I should say. But if I were asked the question of whether that's a good course for the formation of citizens, I'd have to say, tell me more about how it's taught, not just what is being taught. Because ultimately, the hidden curriculum of a course, as embedded in its pedagogy, in the way it does or does not connect teachers, students, and subjects with each other and with the world, is at least as important in its impact on student lives, its formation or deformation of citizens, as the content of the explicit curriculum. Imagine that the course I've just described is taught in the conventional top-down manner, in a classroom or online, As a student, you listen to lectures or tap into other sources of information and interpretation. You keep your head down and take notes, with little room for questions and no real room for dissenting viewpoints and debate. Then you feed back what you've heard and read on papers and tests, which get graded on the degree to which they conform to the official version of reality. Now, such a course, no matter how vivid and fervent the presentation and defense of democracy's values, in a course like that, what gets learned are not the habits of the heart that make for good citizenship in a democracy. A course like that is teaching students habits of the sort that will help them survive in an autocracy or even a fascist regime. Keeping their heads down, parroting back what the leader says, no matter how wrong, factually or morally, never disagreeing with the official line. Don't even think about coming together with others in communities of resistance, because in courses like that, your education have never made you interdependent with other people. And so you have no idea about the value of trust or how to assess who and what is trustworthy. I think the scenario I've just sketched is one of the reasons why people we think of as highly educated are not necessarily good citizens. One of the reasons why a lot of PhDs were found behind the murderous machinery of the Third Reich. No matter how many good words are spoken about democracy and its demands in the course of a lot of people's education, and no matter how many extracurricular activities they engaged in that had to do with good citizenship, the hidden curriculum embedded in their educational process had a pernicious tendency to weaken rather than strengthen their capacity for citizenship. So, is there an alternative within our reach? I think there are many ways to answer that question. The one I want to propose this morning involves looking at the 5 habits of the heart, not only as political virtues, but as principles of a pedagogy that can help educated citizens, educated people, to be citizens in a democracy. So the first habit is an understanding that we're all in this together. Every subject in the curriculum teaches this simple fact, from astronomy to biology to ecology to sociology to economics to great literature on subjects of life and death. We are profoundly interconnected with each other and with the natural world. The way we live, as taught in all of these disciplines, has consequences for other people. But the dominant pedagogy does nothing to communicate, let alone reinforce this habit. On the contrary, it turns us into loners who are in it only for what we can get for ourselves, competitors for rewards called grades in what is too often a zero-sum game. You cannot learn this first habit merely by hearing the words. You have to practice it. That's how habits get developed. So let's envision that class again. This time, instead of all those lectures and personal note-taking, let's look at small groups working together to solve problems posed by the professor. You say students come to college not knowing how to work together this way, then let's make every first-year student take a well-designed, one-credit course in how to make small group collaborations succeed. Then let's envision a buddy system in this political science class where students who are ahead of the curve turn around and tutor those who are not, with the goal that everyone has a chance to succeed. That's how to learn what it means to live out the understanding that we are all in this together. The second habit of the heart is an appreciation of the value of otherness. I don't need to belabor the point that in American politics today, fear of the other is a major driving force of too many things that threaten democracy at its core. It's an ancient fear, of course, the fear of persons who are not part of our tribe or within our comfort zone. The civilizations that have succeeded over time are ones that have countered this fear with an ethic of hospitality. And I want to take that ethic of hospitality and promote it as a pedagogical virtue, a teaching and learning virtue. My greatest teachers were people who taught me to be hospitable to strange ideas. And if they had not given me that gift, I would never have learned anything outside my intellectual and spiritual comfort zone. No one should go through college without encountering courses that challenge to the core their cherished beliefs about what is good and true and beautiful. Faculty should not be penalized for facilitating responsible experiences of that sort, and students should not be treated like customers who are always right when it comes to the boundaries of their beliefs and ideologies. So let's envision that political science class again, but this time, let's envision assignments in which students have to name political convictions that are near and dear to their hearts and debate fellow students who hold different convictions about the same things, prepared in advance with training in how to listen and how to respond that can turn people from demonizing the opposition toward real dialogue. Let's also envision sending students into the community to do appreciative interviews with people whose backgrounds are different from theirs, an opportunity to learn the simple lesson that you can lower the heat and turn up the light by listening to people's stories. The more you know about another person's story, the less able you are to dislike, distrust, or despise them. The third habit of the heart is an ability to hold tension in life-giving ways. If we live in our awareness of our interconnections and learn to invite otherness into our lives, we have to learn to live creatively with intellectual and spiritual tension. But we human beings are tension-avoiding machines. We are hardwired, as they say, with the well-known fight or flight response. When we experience a tension that threatens us, like a clash of ideologies or ideas, we either want to run away or punch out the source. You can see a lot of that kind of behavior in American politics today, as some join the melee and others run away from the political realm altogether. This is a critical issue in the survival of American democracy because the founders left us a system of government that cannot work if we don't know how to capitalize on creative tension. They created the first system I know in which conflict and tension are treated not as the enemy of a good social order, but as the engine of a better social order. As historian Joseph Ellis says, the system the founders gave us was not designed to solve problems efficiently, but to keep the salient problems on the table over time so we could keep coming back to them and find better solutions. That is, move ourselves toward that more perfect union. If the political science class we've been envisioning included the kinds of dialogues and debates I proposed a moment ago, students could start learning about the creative possibilities in holding tension rather than fighting or fleeing from it. It opens the heart, it opens the mind, it makes your life larger. There are simulation games that can be played in class where if people learn to hold the tension of conflicting ideas properly, it turns out that the group working on a problem is smarter than the smartest individual in it when it comes to the right solution to that problem. Once students have experienced that kind of outcome, they've not only learned a lot about how to think together, they've also learned something important about the fruits of thinking together. The fourth habit of the heart is a sense of personal voice and agency. I would like every student in this country, from grade school to high school to college, to learn that he or she has something worth saying, that there's somebody who wants to listen, and that can be you or me, and that he or she has the capacity to act on what's important to them. Clearly, voice is not cultivated when students have to keep their heads down and take notes on what the authorities are saying as the only mode of learning. We need pedagogies that allow for all kinds of speech, including that which we may find odious. I took a big turn as a teacher when I realized that the racist or sexist or homophobic comment that initially froze me in place and made me very angry was something I could actually, on some level, welcome, because now it was out in public where I could deal with it, we could deal with it, rather than being said in private where it would only meet with group assent. And that's what education ought to be about. Service learning is, of course, a great way to learn about personal agency, this movement from theory to practice, what I call putting wheels on ideas. The best of these courses will not only put ideas into action through student initiative, but they will help students learn to hang in with what they're hoping for when the world does not collaborate with our visions for it, which is about 9 times out of 10. Hanging in is, for me at age 78, a big agenda, and I'm hoping that there are many people in this audience who are less than half my age who will want to hang in with the critical work of being change makers for the rest of your lives. The 5th habit of the heart, and finally, is a capacity to create community. And by community, I don't simply mean people with whom I can achieve comfort, although that's important. The appropriate kiss helped as I got underway. But I mean a community that keeps challenging us to create change and to find sustenance in and through each other for the long haul. I think one of the most important things we can learn in this work that we're all so devoted to is that ultimately it's more important to be in right relationship than it is to be right. And by that, I do not mean for a moment that you or I have to give up our conceptions of what's good and true and beautiful. Not for a moment. What I do mean is that what's good and true and beautiful is often complicated. And if we can't hang in with each other, if we can't create containers for ongoing discourse and dialogue, especially when the going gets rough, we will never be able to unravel that Gordian knot of complexities that might finally take us to a place where we see, this is how it is, and this is how it could be, if we remember that it's more important to stay in right relationship than to be right. Blessings on your work. Thank you for carrying the torch forward, and go in peace.
Thank you. Yeah.
Good morning. Thank you, Marina, and thanks to all of you all for being here. I've never quite been able to get my ego up to seeing myself as a rock star, so it's a little tough to follow 2 rock stars. And I was talking with Parker over breakfast about the ground he was going to try to cover, and he was bemoaning the fact that he only had 15 to 18 minutes. And I said, Parker, they only gave me 3. So he said he'd feel 5 times as sorry for me as he felt for himself. But anyway, I'm going to talk fast. So I'd suggest that if we're looking for a silver lining in this incredibly bruising and dispiriting, whichever side you're on, campaign, I'd suggest that millions of Americans are now awake to the fact that we can no longer take our democracy for granted. So we are at this critical inflection point, and the question is, what are we going to do about it? So I'm going to make an assumption about this crowd that if we were on an ideological spectrum, we'd be tipping toward the progressive side pretty heavily. So I want to say one of the things that concerns me is that in most of the conversations, or many of the conversations I've been having with progressives, the first impulse is, where do we go out and get a bigger stick? How do we do what the conservatives did with the Tea Party in 2010? Dig in, say, nothing's going to happen until we get back in power. I just like to suggest that's a death spiral. In our system of divided government, neither party is going to get and hold power long enough to impose its vision of the good society. In our system of divided government, the only way forward is to find common ground. So with that as our starting point, we at Fetzer began about this time last year trying to conceptualize what we've come to call a national movement to heal the heart of American democracy. And it starts from the core proposition that the dysfunction of our democracy, is not going to be solved by changing the system, whether it's ending gerrymandering or campaign finance reform. Those are important. They may well be part of the final solution, but they're not going to happen in our current polarized politics. So the crucial thing is, how can we come together? And we go from there to saying, we need to understand this as essentially, in two fundamental respects, a spiritual and moral challenge. The first respect Parker's talked about. Unless we can reaffirm our commitment to the core civic virtues that are essential to finding that common ground, then our democracy in our country will continue to polarize. And second, unless we can find at a level that's deeper than all that divides us, a shared moral vision for the kind of society we want America to be, then all of those centrifugal forces are going to spin us apart. But if we can, conservatives and liberals, black, white, Hispanic, urban, rural, find that deep shared moral vision, then our competition among our differing policy prescriptions for how to get there can become the virtuous competition that the founders hoped for and envisioned. So, what's this movement look like? It envisions a sector strategy. It says that every major sector of American life has an important role to play. The voluntary sector, the philanthropic sector, faith communities, business, the media, and critically important, higher education. And how do we go forward? First off, we have to recognize there's not going to be any central command and control in this movement. It's all about coming together around a shared vision of healing that empowers each of us to lead wherever we are in whatever way we can. We envision two tracks to this. The first and less important is the national leadership track that hopefully lifts up this vision of healing. Much more important is the ground, on the ground, what's going to happen in local communities and on local campuses to call forth this healing. I'd like to suggest that when the higher education sector reflects on its role, your role, I hope you'll think about three important things. First, to connect with Parker's comments about pedagogy. We need to recognize that every pedagogy, for better or for worse, forms or deforms not just the mind, but the heart and soul. So how do we engage our students and ourselves in a way that educates the heart and soul for human flourishing, including the flourishing of our democracy? The second key area for higher ed, I would suggest, is all the issues around free speech. And this has been an issue that's been front page news in the context of this campaign. That question arises most acutely when someone wants to come on campus with hate speech. And I would suggest that the academy's role is to be strong enough to hold that moment. And so we all show up and we take a stand for our values, including the value that in the academy, every idea gets a chance to be expressed and rebutted, okay? And lastly, what's the role of the academy in helping to lift up this shared moral vision for America? We need, as faculty, students, leaders, to come together. And I'd suggest a particular challenge on that front is how do we make the academy safe for conservatives? And I would add, perhaps for people of faith. My experience of higher education was that it wasn't safe for conservatives. At Fetzer, it's been the same. We're now being very intentional about how can we do that. So I just say very briefly in closing, let's come together around this vision of healing and build a national movement that's powerful enough to drive positive change. And as we do that, let's begin with the hard inner work, recognizing that we can't become healers, bridge builders, if we're coming from a place of anger, fear, ego, and brokenness. So how do we do that hard spiritual inner work of democracy so we can come from a place of love? And I just say, I want to echo Pascale's comments. In the end, it's all about love. And we just need to recognize that. So just in closing, I'd like to leave you with 4 wise quotes from 4 powerful change makers. When I'm trying to rekindle the sense of urgency, I think of Ben Franklin, when at the close of the Constitutional Convention, somebody asked him, "What kind of government have you given us?" And his response was, "A republic, if you can keep it." When I'm looking for energy, I think of Joanna Macy, a wonderful 80-year-old Buddhist teacher and social activist. She says, the exciting thing about this moment is we're living on the knife edge of uncertainty. It can go either way. Now, what a wonderful opportunity for us to have a full and meaningful life by helping it go the right way. When I'm thinking about the largeness of the task, I think of that wonderful quote from Reinhold Niebuhr, the mid-century theologian and social activist who said, "Nothing worth doing can be accomplished in a lifetime, so we have to live by faith." And finally, when I'm looking for hope, I think of Václav Havel's wonderful statement. He said, "Hope is not about optimism. It's about knowing what you're doing is right." We know that this is the work we're all called to do, and I just am excited to know that I'm in the company of fellow travelers. So let's do it. Thank you.
Okay, so now it's question time. If anyone who has a question for any of our speakers or all of our speakers can start lining up at the microphone. We'll start collecting a couple questions at a time.
So my question is, I think a lot of faculty are afraid sometimes to embrace alternative ways of teaching because sometimes our students expect teaching to look the old way, you know, where they're taking notes and you're telling them what the answers are and you tell them exactly what they need to do to get the A. So what suggestions do you have to change that so that faculty feel more comfortable taking risks and changing their teaching? Yeah, anybody?
Yeah. And we'll collect one more question and then.
One of the points that Daniela Pappy Thornton made on Thursday was the need to take a look at the vocabulary we use. And I suggest that part of the vocabulary we look at involves categorizing struggles as having win-win situations. As a former community organizer and union organizer, most struggles that I've been involved with have a win-lose outcome, not a win-win outcome. And if we're going to be altering an unjust equilibrium, which I think is one of our challenges, the speaker who made the point about a national movement indicated, I think, a direction to go in, but that's going to require a very long, bloody, tough struggle, a bare-knuckle brawl. And I think our vocabulary has to reflect that. And I would like to hear the panelists talk about how that gets injected into higher education.
I'll just take on the question about teaching, the risks of teaching, and what student and I think parent expectations are, very briefly. I think you're absolutely right. People come to campus often with an expectation that they're not getting their money's worth if they're not being sat down in chairs, told what to think and believe, writing it down and feeding it back. I think part of the orientation days or week of every college, and I think it ought to be substantial, would have nothing to do with showing you where the bathrooms are or how to get from your dorm to your next class, but would have everything to do with saying you have just stepped onto a different planet. And the planet is one where we are going to prepare you for life in the real world. And life in the real world looks nothing like sitting down in chairs and memorizing what some authority says. What it looks like if you want to enter the new workforce, if you want to be an engaged inhabitant of a rapidly changing world, what it looks like is learning to ask questions that haven't been asked, learning to come up with answers that aren't at the back of the book, and learning to do that together in collective inquiry. That's how scholarship always happens. That's what you're going to be doing here. And we've worked hard with our faculty to make sure that you're getting your money's worth by challenging you to do things that you aren't accustomed to doing. So do you feel uncomfortable? Good, because that's what we're here to do. That's what real learning is all about. And that message has to be delivered to parents as well. And I will tell you that one of the best groups to deliver that message to parents is a group that we often ignore in higher education, and that's the alumni, who have been out there, who know that they've had to unlearn a lot of rote book learning in order to learn how the real world works and to do well in it at a variety of tasks. And they can speak to parents with a credibility that us woolly-headed academic types often can't.
Yeah, on the win-win or win-lose, the first thing that comes to mind is Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail, where he's in dialogue, he's inviting dialogue with the conservative, racist religious leaders of Birmingham. And he focuses on the importance of the legislative change. But he says, enacting that legislation will leave the races physically together but spiritually apart. And the vision he had in mind went way beyond that, to the beloved community where we could be together. And I think the essential insight he had was that the liberation on both sides was in embracing that vision of the beloved community, that the white leaders needed liberation just as much as the blacks. So if you think of a Gandhi or a Mandela or a King, they took a stand for justice, but it was a stand based on love and a genuine concern for the well-being of the other as well as the folks on their side.
I think there's also an undercurrent here where we're seeing generational shifts. And our millennials, they get connectivity in a way that I'm an Xer, so I'm somewhere in between the boomers and the millennials. And so we're bridging these different generations. But there's also an opportunity to create these kind of spaces that will allow those millennial voices to drive the conversation in a way that does allow for a win-win, because they do get it. And there's a degree of resistance at the faculty layer, because that's just not the come from where they're coming into. So if there are movements to open more spaces for students, and it's the human-centered design with the student at the center, that will allow it to flourish in a very organic way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, next 3 questions, rapid fire.
It's a huge honor and privilege to be in your presence, Parker. So I feel like I'm in front of my Rabboni. Whittling down my list of 20 to 2 questions. The first one is, I feel like the biggest barrier for mindful-driven, contemplative faculty is technology. And I would like your thoughts on what we can tell our students, how we can talk to them about the importance of stillness, of space, of attention in the classroom, and just some concrete ways we can articulate to the students how important it is to put their devices down, and maybe even outside of our classroom. And then I guess my second question is also just advice on us, sort of maybe non-tenure track or working our way through the system. How can we construct these discussions with our supervisors and our superiors in ways that they understand that the value of what we're doing is to put the university in a 7 or 5 generation mindset as opposed to just now? Thanks.
My name is Brittany. I am a millennial. I am that millennial. And Parker, you so beautifully in this interview with Courtney Martin and Krista Tippett, you talked about, you gave this beautiful analogy of, generations being along this arc of experience. And in some ways, I'm on a different point of this arc, and I can see things that you can't, and you can see things that I can't. And I come to this work, I spend a lot of time with social entrepreneurs. I'm on Ashoka's fellowship team. I hear people saying in panels, we are living in a poverty of love. Lennon Flower said that yesterday. That we are in a spiritual and moral crisis, right? Michelle Alexander, who wrote The New Jim Crow, has left the law school at Ohio State to go to Union Theological Seminary, saying that this problem is deeper than policy in such a beautifully, a very public way. Jennifer Bailey saying, I believe in God, and that's weird to say. Reverend Jennifer Bailey, also Ashoka Fellow. I believe in God, and that's weird to say in some spaces. And I want to make space for those conversations to happen. And sometimes it feels like there isn't oxygen for that, or that it's almost bold or brash to bring love into the conversation of things like social entrepreneurship. So my question is, one, you've done that. You've built space for these conversations to happen in very formal feeling institutions, and I'm being given permission to try to do that. So what do I do? And is this new? I mean, in some ways I feel like this is an old discovery. This is an age-old discovery that love is important. We all know this, but at the same time I do feel like in this sector it is coming. I mean, we're having this as the closing plenary. So is this new? How much of this is new in inviting these kinds of conversations into these formal spaces?
And we are already over time. So what I'm going to ask everyone to do is to stay a few minutes after the panel to keep speaking, but in 1 minute or 30 seconds each, just say final comments to address the fundamental questions you just heard.
Oh, okay then. So just 2 quick things. One, in answer to the very first question about speaking with people about stillness, I urge you to read a piece by William Dershowitz that appeared in the American Scholar. It was a remarkable talk he gave at West Point, an unlikely setting for this, in which he talked to the cadets about the fact that they were all so heavily wired and so heavily programmed all through high school and grade school to get into West Point. And the West Point faculty was keeping them so busy to prove their mettle that someday they would be on a battlefield making a decision in a split second that would either save or cost dozens, maybe hundreds of lives. And if they did not know their way to that place of stillness within themselves, where they could make a profoundly reflective and wise decision rather than a reactive decision, they would be derogating their duties as military officers. It's an amazing talk in a most unlikely setting, and if it's true for military officers under battle conditions, it's surely true for a lot of people. And he goes on to talk about the importance of meditation in terms I've never heard. The only words I would add to that is I closed my talk by saying, go in peace. I meant also to say, and raise some hell. So that's a theological term.
I would say, do you. I think that, just picking up on this theme, that we have lots of filters of our own stuff that gets in the way of the connectivity. And that meditation is certainly a tool in the toolkit, but being very forgiving and generous with ourselves. You know, there's an outward pull in this work, and particularly those of us who are willing to immerse ourselves into the integration of the work, those things start to get collapsed, and we lose sight of taking care of ourselves. But the ability to be a mirror, a filter, to channel, all that gets clouded when the inner work is incomplete. And aspects of that inner work emerge through the work, right? So it's not like, you know, I've been dealing with daddy issues for 40 plus years. Every time I think the damn thing is handled, it comes up again, you know? And it's cool, like now we got a relationship with that issue, me and the issue. But my point is, that's a whole nother story. But it allows something to happen when we're able to forgive ourselves. Then you become more compassionate out there, right? So if I could build on that thread, it's just do you and take care of you and allow your capacity to give to expand through that effort.
Bring us home, Bob.
Okay, first on technology. I think that the education world as a whole needs to recognize the importance of mindful use of technology. I was out in Silicon Valley 2 weeks ago with some tech entrepreneurs and having a conversation about how their business model is totally dependent on grabbing and holding eyeballs. And they, in a candid moment, said whether the social impact of that is positive or negative. And they observed rage grabs and holds eyeballs. That's a reality. Unless we deal with it straight on, it's going to tear us apart. On the permission to talk about love, I think the only answer there is just summon up our courage and start talking about love. And I think we'll find, as we found around the dinner tables last night, how hungry people are to be invited into a space where they can have that conversation.
So as we quickly close and wrap up, I encourage all of you to take some of this mantle of love and spreading it for yourself and others. We would also love to express our appreciation and gratitude for all the many sponsors. So if you could join me in thanking and giving love to our sponsors.